She paid for a first-class seat. She checked in early. She followed every rule. She smiled at the gate, and still, she was told to step aside. Why was a successful black woman a CEO? No less quietly denied her rightful seat on a flight she paid for. Was it a system glitch or something far more deliberate? Why did the staff whisper instead of explain? Why did no one look her in the eye? And what power did this woman hold that would make an entire airline regret what they did? What happened on that flight would spark a storm far greater than turbulence. This isn't just about one seat. It's about every seat denied through bias, every moment of silence that hides injustice, and every calm voice that has the power to shift the skies. Who is Dr. Sienna Caldwell? And how did she go from being quietly dismissed to grounding an entire airline? You're about to find out. If this story stirs something in you, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's take off together. The flight begins now. The cabin air was still and thick, not with heat, but tension. Gate C9 had started boarding early for flight AA2273 to New York, and first-class passengers were lining up like clockwork suits, sunglasses, silver watches, stiletto heels, monogrammed luggage wheels humming softly over tile. In the middle of it stood Dr. Sienna Caldwell, tall, composed, silent. She wore a soft gray wool suit tailored with intent. No jewelry except for a slim gold watch and a ring her late mother had worn for 25 years. One hand held a black leather carry-on. The other clutched a boarding pass for seat 2A, a window seat in first class. The gate agent had already scanned her code, but now a uniformed flight attendant stood blocking her path inside the aircraft. iPad in hand, voice pleasant but strained. "I'm so sorry for the confusion. Dr. Caldwell, there's been an equipment change. It affected the seating configuration." Sienna tilted her head. "Just slightly. No emotion yet." "I see," she said calmly. "And this equipment change happened after I checked in with a confirmed first-class ticket, the flight attendant Trina Holloway. According to the brass tag, hesitated." Her eyes darted toward the open jet bridge. Her fingers clutched the tablet tighter. It was overnight. The system auto-adjusted certain seat assignments, and this man, in seat 2. Sienna's eyes flicked toward the doorway of the plane. Seated comfortably just inside was a middle-aged white man in a navy blazer and noise-canceling headphones, already sipping something amber-colored from a glass cup. "Mr. Langford," Trina said after a pause. "He was rebooked into 2A this morning at the counter." Sienna didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "I boarded before he did," she said. "My boarding pass says 2A. May I ask, why was I the one downgraded?" Another pause. Trina's face softened, but remained guarded. "We're scheduled for pushback in 9 minutes. I really do apologize for the inconvenience, but the best available seat is 12C in economy, plus. I can assist you." A quiet breath escaped from Sienna's nose. Not a sigh, a calibration. She raised her chin slightly. Her tone remained even. "Ms. Holloway, do you know who I am?" The air between them stiffened. A few nearby passengers looked up. Trina hesitated, caught between protocol and instinct. Her corporate script offered no line for what came next. "With respect." "Ma'am," she began. "I don't believe I'm not asking for deference." Sienna interrupted gently. "I'm asking whether you know whose first-class seat your system just decided was expendable." The silence that followed was not quiet. It was alive. the kind of silence that follows a piano key struck too hard in a hushed auditorium, a note you can't unsound. And suddenly, the hum of the terminal felt louder. The subtle shift of posture, the quickened glance of a younger woman 3 rows back. The man beside the window who lowered his newspaper just an inch. Everyone was listening, but no one spoke. Not yet. Sienna did not move. Her body language was clear, calm, immovable, professional. But her eyes, they burned, not with fury, but something sharper. Precision. Back inside the jetway, a young employee wearing a headset leaned in to whisper something to Trina. A glance was exchanged, then a quick nod. Trina stepped aside. "Please, go ahead," she said, her voice quieter now. "But you may still need to speak with the lead attendant on board. There's still some confusion." Sienna gave a faint nod and stepped forward. As she walked through the narrow corridor, a breeze of perfume trailed behind her, clean, subtle. She passed the threshold of the aircraft, entering the space she had been promised. But even as her heels tapped softly on the aircraft floor, she already knew something was wrong. Seat 2A was not hers anymore. 5 hours earlier, the sun had not yet risen over Denver when Sienna Caldwell woke without an alarm. She never needed one. Her body obeyed its own precision clock, a quiet, internal discipline honed over decades, the kind built not just through ambition, but necessity. She sat up slowly in the dim light of her bedroom, the city skyline still cloaked in a blue-gray haze beyond the glass walls. Buildings blinked like scattered constellations. The silence of 5 sorors felt almost sacred. A soft knock, then a familiar voice. Espresso's ready. Margot, her housekeeper of nearly 15 years, entered the room holding a porcelain cup on a wooden tray, her hair in a tight bun, eyes kind and awake, in that way only early risers ever were. Sienna nodded her thanks. She took the cup, sipped, and let the warmth settle. Then, as always, she moved deliberate and efficient. A half hour on the Peloton, 10-minute stretch, cold shower, hair pinned, moisturizer pressed into skin, soft gray suit steamed and waiting, a quick breakfast avocado, chili flakes, lemon. Margot had cut it just the way she liked. Toast still warm. "You're quiet today," Margot said, pouring water into the glass beside her. Sienna glanced up from her tablet, where she was already skimming unread emails. Long day ahead. "The board meeting," Margot asked gently. Sienna nodded. Today, she would fly to New York to finalize a deal 18 months in the making Solera Capital's acquisition of Aurelius Air, one of the last legacy airlines still functioning under its original structure. It was a $5.2 billion merger, a lifeline for Aurelius, and a strategic expansion for Solera. On paper, it was brilliant, but under the surface volatile. Unions were restless. Executives were wary. Employees were divided. "Not everyone likes being rescued," Sienna murmured, more to herself than anyone. Margot tilted her head. "That doesn't mean it isn't the right thing." Sienna gave a small smile. "Tell that to the flight crews worried about losing pensions. Tell that to the woman who built Solera Capital without breaking her integrity." Sienna paused. Margot rarely flattered. Her words were always earned. "I'll try to remember that," she said softly. By 6:30 a.m. Her driver, Sam, was waiting in the quiet curve beneath her building. He opened the door without a word. They had an unspoken agreement. Morning were for silence unless otherwise noted. The Tesla slid through pre-dawn streets like thought through memory. Sienna reviewed her digital presentation while Sam navigated I-70 toward Denver International Airport. The dashboard glow cast soft blue lines across her face. Her focus never wavered. She scrolled, annotated, adjusted slide headings with quiet precision. But somewhere between mile marker 104 and the airport turnoff, a flicker. That feeling again, not fear, not quite tension, a tightness in her chest, like something was misaligned. She ignored it. What she could not know, what she had no reason to suspect, was that 40 minutes earlier, in a control center deep inside Aurelius Air's Colorado operations hub, a man named Donald Greer had seen her name flash across a system alert and made a choice. He didn't hesitate. He hovered the mouse over her name for only 3 seconds, long enough to remember her photo in a Fortune cover story, long enough to recall what she'd said at that investment summit last fall. Legacy carriers must evolve or vanish. Nostalgia doesn't pay for fuel. He'd watched the video twice, made his stomach twist. So when the system flagged an equipment change replacing the original Boeing 777 with a smaller Airbus 321, he clicked past other names until he found hers. Dr. Sienna Caldwell, Manual Override Economy. Plus, and with that, he sipped his coffee and smiled bitterly in the dim glow of the operations screen. Let's see how she likes a middle seat. He didn't think it would matter. Not really. People got bumped all the time. But something inside him needed her to feel it. That flash of indignity. That taste of less than. Even if only for a flight. Sienna arrived at the terminal without issue. The check-in process was swift. Her executive platinum status ensured it. The agent even recognized her. Dr. Caldwell. Just the one bag today. Yes, thank you, she replied, handing over her ID. But then, the frown. That's odd. You're showing as seat 12C this morning. Did you change your reservation? Sienna looked up, brows knit. No, I'm going to check something. The agent tapped quickly, then slower. Looks like an overnight aircraft swap. System must have reassigned some seats. She watched him carefully. He was young, earnest. He wasn't lying. I'll make a note. He said, if anything opens up at the gate, they'll upgrade you. Understood, Sienna replied calmly. Taking her new boarding pass, she passed through security without incident, made her way to the lounge, sat in a corner booth, laptop open, latte untouched. But the feeling had grown louder. She didn't yet know how deliberate it had been. But she knew this in her position. These things weren't supposed to happen. And when they did, it was never random. Not anymore. The air inside the aircraft was warmer than expected. Doctor? Sienna Caldwell stepped across the threshold and into a world that had once welcomed her without question. First-class cabins, priority treatment, smiles laced with deference. But today, something was off. Her eyes scanned the layout. It was clear this was the smaller Airbus configuration. First class had just 2 rows, 4 seats across. Clean lines. Quiet. And someone was already seated in 2A. A man white, mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, pressed shirt slightly wrinkled at the belly. He looked relaxed, as if the seat belonged to him, as if he hadn't just stolen it from her without lifting a finger. He didn't glance up, didn't acknowledge her presence. A hum filled Sienna's ears, the low, muffled murmur of injustice. The kind you couldn't quite prove. The kind that wore a business smile and corporate apology. The lead flight attendant, Gwen, approached from the galley. "Welcome aboard," she said, offering a smile that faltered as she scanned Sienna's boarding pass. "Oh, I believe there's a discrepancy. Let me check the manifest." She disappeared. Sienna waited, standing, still holding her leather carry-on. The other first-class passengers were seated now. No one offered help. No one looked at her directly, as if her presence, her body, her blackness, her womanhood, her silence was disrupting the unspoken order. 3 minutes later, Gwen returned. "I apologize. Dr. Caldwell, it seems there's been a reassignment due to the plane switch. Your original seat, 2A, was released." Sienna arched a brow. "I didn't release it, no, but the system did. You've been reassigned to 12C in our Economy Plus cabin. Would you like assistance with stowing your bag?" Sienna tilted her head. "No." The word cut the air. "I'd like to speak to the captain." Gwen blinked. "Excuse me. I'd like to speak to the captain," Sienna repeated. Calm, but unflinching. "I'm not trying to escalate, but you've displaced the primary investor in the parent company that owns this airline, and I'd like an explanation not from your iPad, but from your chain of command." Gwen flushed. "I'll see what I can do." She vanished again, 12 rows back. Donald Greer's petty click echoed in silence. It had done its damage. The humiliation was complete, except Sienna wasn't humiliated. She was observing, and that was more dangerous. While she waited, Sienna felt a presence slide into view beside her. Trina Holloway, the original gate attendant, now back on board, reappeared with an apologetic smile. "Dr. Caldwell, I sincerely apologize for how this has unfolded. We can offer you a voucher, and we'll note the incident for follow-up, if you'd like. We can escort you to 12C while we sort this." "No," Sienna replied. "I'll remain here." She placed her carry-on on the empty seat across from 2A-2B. Then slowly, deliberately, she sat down in it. She didn't speak. She didn't argue. She simply occupied space. That was enough. The man in 2A finally glanced sideways. Brock Langford had flown often. He didn't recognize Sienna, but something about her unnerved him. Her poise, her power, her refusal to be erased. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone dry. She looked at him, voice even. "You're sitting in my seat." He raised a brow. "Ticket says 2A. So did mine." A pause. "Well, then, I guess they made a mistake." "They did." She held his gaze, unblinking. Brock shifted in his seat, took another sip, looked out the window. Minutes ticked by. The crew bustled quietly. Voices lowered. Passengers murmured. Something was happening. Something unscripted. Then, finally, a uniformed pilot stepped out of the cockpit. Captain Elias Warren, gray-haired, trim, eyes sharp. "Dr. Caldwell?" he asked. She stood slowly. "Yes, Captain Warren," he said, offering a firm but respectful nod. "I understand there's been an issue with your seating. May we speak privately near the galley?" She followed him. Inside the galley, the hum of the plane grew quieter. "I just got briefed." The captain began. "I'm sorry this has reached you directly, especially under these circumstances." "Under what circumstances?" "Exactly." Captain Warren hesitated. "We had an aircraft swap at 414A, That altered the configuration. The seating was reshuffled. Then why wasn't I reseated to the next available seat in first class?" A pause. "I can't answer that." "Would you like me to?" she asked softly. "I'm not sure that would help right now." Sienna took a breath, then spoke with quiet intensity. "Captain, in the last year, Solara Capital acquired 47% stake in Aurelius Air. I sit on the board. The only reason this flight is happening, the only reason your paycheck clears this Friday, is because of that merger." Captain Warren's face did not change. "I understand." "Then tell me," Sienna said, "if this had happened to someone else, Someone with no title, no board seat, no power, would it still be acceptable? He looked her in the eye. No, it wouldn't be. A silence stretched between them. Then the captain said, "Please return to your seat. I'll resolve this." Back at row 2, the tension was now thick enough to hold shape. The man in 2A was checking his phone. Gwen stood at the galley, whispering again. Trina fidgeted with the manifest. When Sienna returned and sat in 2B again, everyone watched. Moments later, the captain reappeared. He spoke directly to Gwen. "Clear 2A. Reassign Mr. Langford to the next flight." Gwen looked stunned. "Sir, you heard me. But we are out of compliance with FAA boarding protocols if our seating policy violates the manifest's priority hierarchy. That includes business partnerships and ethics." "Mr. Langford stood up. "This is outrageous." Captain Warren didn't flinch. "You'll be rebooked on Flight 1196. You can wait at the gate. This aircraft will depart on schedule." Sienna remained seated, silent. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just watched. And for the first time that morning, she felt something close to control return. For a moment, the cabin felt like it exhaled. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was taut. It buzzed with suppressed questions, half-heard whispers, and unspoken reckonings. "Doctor." Sienna Caldwell didn't relax into her seat. She sat upright in 2B, arms resting on the polished wood of the center console, her gaze fixed forward. Her leather carry-on was tucked neatly beneath her feet. Her posture, her stillness, it all sent a message that she was done asking, that she was watching now. Across the aisle, the elderly couple in 2C and 2D avoided eye contact. The woman offered a brittle smile before quickly turning away. It wasn't personal, but it was political. Everything was. Meanwhile, back in the galley, Gwen paced in clipped, quiet steps. Her hands moved in sharp gestures as she whispered into the interphone, likely updating the ground team. Her eyes kept darting toward the front of the cabin, toward Sienna. "She's staying in 2B, she said, her voice trembling. Captain removed Langford. "Yes. I know who he is." Pause. "I don't know why she didn't just take the voucher." 12 rows back in row 12C. The seat meant for Sienna now held a confused teenager trying to swap spots with his brother. The back cabin had no idea a storm was brewing up front. But in the business offices of Aurelius Air at Logan International, that storm was being tracked. Donald Greer, the operations director who had approved the seating override, sat in a conference room with 3 phones ringing at once. "What do you mean she's still on board?" he asked. A junior assistant, pale and sweating, stammered. "She refused to move. Said she was staying in first class. Then the captain kicked Langford off." "Yes, sir." Donald closed his eyes, took a breath, and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Do you know who she is?" "Yes, sir. We just didn't catch it in time, because you weren't looking." Back in the sky bridge, Trina Holloway stepped out to make a personal call. The weight of what she had seen, the initial dismissal, the casual erasure, the quiet resistance was catching up to her. She dialed her sister. "Hey, Tanya." "Yeah, I just can I have in a sec." A pause. "No, nothing's wrong. Something happened. And it hit me harder than I thought it would. A black woman. Board seat. Whole airline. Treated like she didn't belong. Again. Silence. No, I didn't say anything to her. Not really. I stood there. And I shouldn't have." Her voice cracked. "I should have done something. Said something. Even if it was small." Back on the plane, Captain Elias Warren returned to the cockpit. He'd been flying commercial for 27 years. He'd seen all kinds of passengers, rude, kind, confused, rich, lost, angry, but very few had ever sat in their seat like Sienna Caldwell. Just had, quietly, with dignity, and with an invisible fire that warmed the whole cabin to the truth. He adjusted his headset and opened the line. "This is Captain Warren. We'll be pushing back shortly." His co-pilot glanced over. "Still thinking about it, yeah. Did you know who she was?" "No." A pause. "But I do now." Back in 2B, Sienna reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She had 5 unread texts. From her executive assistant. From her brother. From Selena, her best friend and crisis manager. "They moved you or want me to go public yet. Need me to call Marcus at the Times. Are you okay? Say the word, and I'll break the internet." Sienna smiled faintly. She texted back, "Not yet. Give me 30 minutes. She looked up. The flight attendants were prepping the safety video. Trays clicked, lights dimmed. And for a second, just one fragile, beautiful second, Sienna allowed herself to lean back. But inside, a storm was still forming. The aircraft had begun taxiing. Denver's runway lights sparkled like measured Morse code across the morning mist, each flicker a message from machines to machines. But inside the aircraft, humanity clung tight, tangled in assumptions, history, and the quiet fight for dignity. "Doctor," Sienna Caldwell adjusted the cuffs of her blazer. Her fingers were steady, but her mind raced. She wasn't rattled, not yet, but she wasn't at peace either. 20 years earlier, she'd boarded a different plane, a red-eye to Boston, age 23, graduated top of her class at Howard, clutching an acceptance letter to Harvard Business School and a carry-on with torn lining. She had no money, no contacts, and exactly one suit. In row 31C, pressed between a coughing man and a mother with a screaming baby, she had stayed up the entire flight reading Michael Porter, Clayton Christensen, The Harvard Case Method. When the flight attendant had offered her peanuts, she declined, not because she wasn't hungry, but because she was counting every dollar. She remembered everything, especially how no one had looked at her twice. And now they looked, but only to assess, to measure, to decide. Captain Warren guided the plane toward takeoff. His voice crackled over the speakers with the calm of a man who had done this thousands of times. "Flight time today is just under 4 hours. Smooth conditions expected until New York. Please sit back and enjoy your flight." But beneath his tone, there was something else, a charge. Even the co-pilot, usually chatty, was quiet. Warren rubbed his temples before leaning toward the microphone again, this time on the private channel. "To ground control. Tower. This is Aurelius 282 requesting additional ground-to-air logs for an onboard VIP doctor, Caldwell. Can you confirm who made seating override?" The response was slow, awkward. "We're looking into that now." "Captain." Sienna opened her laptop, not to work, but to ground herself. The screen glowed softly. She pulled up her merger file. Numbers, charts, legal clauses. None of it soothed her. Instead, her eyes caught on the internal projections for employee retention. How many of them, she wondered, would see her presence as an asset? How many would see her as a threat? And how many, like Donald Greer, would see her as a problem to be handled? She tapped the screen with a faint sigh. Then she closed the laptop. What she needed now wasn't data. It was resolve. Further down the aisle, Trina Holloway had finally taken her seat. She'd been upgraded ironically, to a row near the back of first class. Her fingers shook slightly as she pulled out her notepad. A journalist by training, she hadn't written a story in over 6 months. Corporate PR paid more, hurt less. But now her pen moved. She sat there, still, powerful, without needing volume. The kind of strength they don't prepare you for in business school, because it doesn't fit the textbook. Trina blinked. She hadn't meant to write it like a profile, but something in her had awakened. Maybe she'd needed to see someone like Sienna Caldwell, to remember what dignity under fire looked like. In the cockpit, Warren received a ping on his screen. Private memo from Aurelius HQ. Subject Dr. Caldwell incident contain and acknowledge. No public statements without legal review. He swore under his breath. This wasn't just a bump now. It was a containment situation, and he didn't like being used. Back in seat 2B, Sienna noticed Gwen approaching again. The flight attendant paused beside her, then strangely knelt slightly to meet her eye level. Dr. Caldwell, Gwen said softly. I just wanted to say, I didn't know. I didn't recognize you earlier. If I had, you would have treated me better. Gwen froze. No, I just mean, I should have known about your status. Sienna studied her face. She didn't hate Gwen. In fact, something about the woman reminded her of the nurses who had raised her when her mother worked 2 jobs. Tired eyes, too many systems to obey, too little time. I understand, Sienna said gently, but let me be clear. I shouldn't need to be recognized to be respected. Gwen's cheeks flushed. She nodded. Thank you. Somewhere near the lavatories, a teenage boy glanced toward the front of the plane. Hey, Mom, he whispered, nudging her sleeve. What is it? That's the woman from the TED Talk, the one about rebuilding corporate trust. The mother peered ahead. Sienna was now typing something on her phone. Calm, composed. She's pretty, the boy added, but she looks kind of sad. The mother didn't respond. She just watched, and slowly, her face changed, like she'd begun remembering something, or realizing something. Inside her phone, Sienna had just sent a text to her assistant tell legal to release the email logs. If they don't respond in 30 mins, go to the board. Then she paused. Her finger hovered over another contact, Chairman Peter Langford, the man who had championed her rise, who had begged her to take this merger. He was also the father of the man forcibly removed from seat 2B. Sienna tapped, paused, tapped again, deleted the message. Instead, she opened her notes app. At the top, she wrote, "This story will not be told by accident." 30 minutes into the flight, the cabin had settled, but the tension had only gone quiet, not away. The hum of the engines wasn't loud enough to drown out the thoughts in Dr. Sienna Caldwell's head. Her fingers traced slow circles on the armrest, not out of boredom, but to remind herself that she was still in control, that no matter how polite the injustice looked in first-class leather, it was still injustice. Across the aisle, a suited man peered over his laptop screen. He recognized her now, not from the news, not from business, from college. They had taken a leadership seminar together once. He remembered how she'd raised her hand every time. Her voice had carried certainty, not bravado. He remembered thinking she was too much, too sharp, too driven, too black. He remembered not voting for her for class president, even though she had the best platform. And he remembered feeling vaguely proud of himself for being honest. Now she sat across from him, 3 degrees, 4 companies, $1 billion merger later, and hadn't even glanced his way. The man swallowed hard and returned to pretending he wasn't part of the problem. In the cabin's rear, Trina Holloway stared at her half-finished notes. She should have been writing an article by now. The story practically unfolded in cinematic scenes, but something gnawed at her. She hadn't stood up. Not when the gate agent brushed off Sienna. Not when the man took her seat. Not when the crew had tried to pressure her out of first class. She'd watched. She'd whispered. She'd done what was safe. Trina looked down at her journal. On the next page, she scribbled, "How many times have I been part of the silent choir, applauding power by omission?" And then beneath it, "What's my story going to be in this story?" Up front, Captain Elias Warren read the message that had just come through from ground operations statement pending from Solara Capital Legal. No media contact. Situation now flagged executive sensitive. Do not engage. He stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. Meanwhile, Gwen made her way slowly up the aisle, checking on passengers. She stopped near 2B. Sienna looked up, expression unreadable. "I just wanted to ask," Gwen said carefully, "if you'd like anything. Coffee, water. Anything to make you more comfortable." Sienna tilted her head. "You mean, now that I've been allowed to keep what I already paid for?" Gwen flushed. "Yes," Sienna continued, softer now. "I'd love some water. And if it's not too much trouble, I'd like a little silence." Gwen nodded quickly and turned away. But the truth was, she didn't mind Sienna's sharpness. She minded that it was justified. Elsewhere in the sky, above clouds and below bureaucracy, the jet moved steadily eastward, but inside Sienna's chest, a familiar ache had begun. Not anger, exhaustion, the kind that builds slowly over decades, from being the only one in boardrooms, from being mistaken for the assistant, the help, the background, from being told you're so articulate like it was a compliment, from knowing that even now, with a title that could buy seats in entire rows of first class, she still had to prove herself worthy of the one she'd paid for. She turned to the window. Below, the patchwork land stretched on vast and beautiful and complicated, just like the country she loved and often didn't love her back. She thought of her grandmother in Jackson, Mississippi, who'd marched with her church in heels too tight, carrying a sign that read, "I am worthy." She thought of her father, a mechanic, who died from an infection that should have been treated sooner. If only someone had listened. She thought of all the things she'd buried to get here, and now they were unburying themselves on this plane, in this moment, with the weight of the world in seat 2B. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. A message from Selena, her head of public relations crisis plan in place. "We can leak if needed. NYT and Axios both watching this flight. Say the word." Sienna stared at the screen. There was power in that text. Nuclear-level power. But power, she'd learned, was only as useful as its timing. She set the phone down. The storm wasn't ready yet. Let them sweat first. Let them show the world who they were. Back at corporate HQ, Donald Greer had locked himself in a side room. He was sweating through his undershirt. On the screen in front of him, 4 tabs open. 2 were real-time coverage of airline incidents. 1 was Sienna Caldwell's Wikipedia page. The 4th, an email draft to the CEO of Solara Capital. "We may need to initiate a silent apology package. Recommend internal review but do not escalate to full media channels." He paused, then deleted the last line. In row 3D, a mother whispered to her young daughter, "That woman up front, she runs the whole company." The girl blinked. "Like, the whole plane?" Her mom chuckled. "Something like that." The girl looked ahead at Sienna and said quietly, She looks like a superhero. And for the first time since boarding, Sienna smiled. A small one. The kind that lives more in the eyes than the lips. She didn't need to wear a cape. She just needed to stay in the seat she earned. The seatbelt light blinked off with a soft chime. But for Dr. Sienna Caldwell, there was no easing of tension. Her thoughts were sharper than ever, cutting through every pleasantry around her like glass through silk. Just across the aisle, a passenger began chatting about real estate portfolios with his companion, raising his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to know how many buildings he owned. His laugh, performative and hollow, was a thin veil of power worn too tightly. Sienna tuned him out. She had more pressing matters. She opened her laptop quietly and began reviewing the email that Selena had prepared a legal alert to the FAA, a public relations strategy, and the attached timeline of microaggressions that started at the gate. Each line was a trigger, each timestamp a weight. She didn't need to make noise to be heard, but when she did speak, people would feel it. At that moment, in the forward galley, Gwen huddled with a junior flight attendant, a fresh recruit named Becca. "She's not doing anything wrong," Gwen murmured, "but it's like every move she makes has gravity." Becca nodded. "She reminds me of my mom." Yeah, she was a nurse. Always had this quiet way of making people realize they were wrong without raising her voice. Just held them accountable with a look. Gwen thought about that. That's what she's doing, but with the whole plane. Meanwhile, Trina Holloway tapped open her phone and began writing an anonymous thread. She didn't name names, not yet, but she wrote what she saw. A black woman denied the seat she paid for, disrespected at the gate, surrounded by performative silence in first class. Her hands shook slightly as she wrote. Then she posted, "The world keeps asking black women to shrink, to apologize for taking up the space they've earned, to whisper when they've already paid to speak. Today, one woman didn't shrink. She stayed seated. She made silence louder than shouting, and that changed everything." 30 seconds later, the post hit 3,000 likes, then 10,000. By the time the plane crossed into West Virginia airspace, the number had tripled, and Aurelius Ayre's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. In seat 2B, Sienna's phone buzzed again. "Selena Twitter's heating." "Internal legal team wants to know if you're pressing charges. Media's watching." What now? Sienna's reply was short. "Wait. Let them come to us." She wasn't done gathering receipts. Let them feel the weight of it all. Not from fury, but from clarity. Back at Aurelius HQ, Donald Greer's phone rang again. This time it wasn't legal. It was the CEO of Solara Capital. "Donald," came the clipped voice of Veronica Sloan. "Why is my inbox full of headlines about discrimination on our flagship airline involving our partner Donald fumbled? She refused the voucher. She refused the seat we gave her. She didn't refuse. She claimed what was hers." There was a pause. "Who made the override? I did. Based on, you're done making anything? Pull the manifest? Issue a formal apology? And Donald, yes, if she grounds that plane, we won't stop her." Sienna took a breath. She glanced at the woman beside her, a soft-spoken academic reading a novel. The woman gave her a quiet, knowing nod. "You handled that with grace," she said, voice barely above the hum of the engines. Sienna nodded. Grace only matters when it's met with decency. There was a long silence. "I hope they do better," the woman added softly. Sienna met her eyes. "I don't need them to do better. I need them to feel this." Back in row 12, a flight attendant began passing out drinks. Two teenagers scrolled through their phones. eyes wide. "Yo," one whispered. "That lady in the front. She's like a big deal." His friend leaned closer. "What happened?" "She didn't move when they tried to kick her out of first class. Now the internet's going nuts." They both looked ahead in awe. Then one of them added, "Kinda hope she owns the whole airline or something." The other grinned. "Bet she does." In the cockpit, Captain Elias Warren heard the soft ding of his internal line. It was from ground control. An update and a request. Passenger Caldwell remain undisturbed. Executive directive. Full authority granted. He leaned back slowly. The storm had reached them now. He glanced through the door crack, just barely catching a glimpse of her profile. Still, poised, like a loaded verdict. He turned to his co-pilot and said, "Mark this flight. We'll be hearing about it for years." At the back of the cabin, Trina closed her phone. She had posted her truth. Now it was on others to carry it. But even as she settled back into her seat, she knew when that plane landed, the world would be different. Not because Sienna had shouted, but because she hadn't had to. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft golden hue as the plane cruised above the Appalachian Mountains. The sky outside was painted in streaks of lavender and dust blue. But inside the aircraft, tension glowed beneath the surface. Sienna Caldwell closed her laptop and folded her hands over it, feeling the reverberation of movement not just from the plane, but from the world beyond it. Her name was trending. Her silence was trending. Her refusal to be moved was now louder than a speech. And she hadn't said a word in public yet. Across from her, Gwen approached with slow, cautious steps. "Dr. Caldwell," she said, her voice softer now, lacking its earlier edge. "Would you like a refreshment?" Sienna glanced up. Her eyes were calm, unreadable. "A tea, please. Chamomile. No sugar." Gwen nodded, almost too eagerly, and disappeared again. Sienna could feel it happening. The slow unraveling of the script people cling to when power dynamics shift. The scramble to reset. To soften the blow without owning the harm. In the cockpit, Captain Elias Warren read over the executive update from Solera Capital again. It was rare for an airline directive to come mid-flight, rarer still for it to override the standard chain of command. But here it was, in black and white. Ensure passenger Caldwell is treated with full protocol deference. Any staff deviation will be considered an executive violation. Elias leaned back. So now they realize who she is. His co-pilot chuckled dryly. Too late for courtesy. The apology tour's already late. Elias sighed. It's not about apology anymore. It's about exposure. Back in first class, the man who had earlier been boasting about his real estate holdings now sat quietly, scrolling through his phone. He glanced at Sienna, then back at his screen, then at her again. This time, his posture shifted. A stiffness entered his shoulders. An understanding crept across his face. He finally knew who he was sitting near. Not just a black woman in a seat. A black executive who could, and very likely would, rewrite the headlines by the time they landed. Trina Holloway's phone was blowing up. Direct messages, mentions, requests for interviews. She stared at it with equal parts pride and guilt. Her words had caught fire. But still she hadn't said anything out loud to the woman 2 rows ahead of her. Hadn't even whispered a thank you. She closed her phone, unbuckled her seatbelt, and slowly stood. She made her way toward first class with deliberate steps, her throat dry, her hands a little clammy. As she approached 2B, Gwen stiffened, ready to intercept. But Sienna saw her coming and offered a small nod. "It's all right," she said quietly to Gwen. Trina stepped forward, heart racing. "Dr. Caldwell," she whispered, kneeling slightly at her seat. "I just wanted to say thank you. For staying seated. For not letting them erase you." Sienna tilted her head slightly. "Thank you for seeing it," she replied gently. "I wanted to say something earlier," Trina added, voice cracking. "I didn't. I froze. But I wrote, and now everyone's talking about it." Sienna nodded slowly. "We all speak in different ways. Some stand, some write, some kneel." Trina's eyes welled up. Sienna leaned forward, her voice like warm steel. "Just don't let them teach your silence to your daughters." Trina swallowed. "I won't." In the last row of first class, a man in a crisp navy blazer leaned over to his wife and whispered, "Should we say something too?" His wife glanced at Sienna, then shook her head. "She doesn't need our approval. She needs our awareness." Meanwhile, in the Solara Capital boardroom, Veronica Sloane stood at the head of the table, facing a wall of projection screens. "Pull every override for first-class seating in the last 90 days, she instructed. "Sort by passenger profile. I want data, I want patterns, and I want policies rewritten by morning." Her chief legal officer looked up, wary. This could expose internal bias. It should. Veronica tapped her fingers slowly on the table. "This isn't just about her seat. It's about who we think deserves one." Sienna sipped her tea slowly as the flight attendant returned, her hands steady now. She looked down at the paper cup, then out the window. The clouds had thinned. The stars were faintly visible, but her mind wasn't in the sky. It was in boardrooms, airports, articles not yet written, classrooms where young girls would hear about what happened today, not because she had made a scene, but because she hadn't let the scene make her disappear. And yet, even in the quiet, doubt crept in. Had she done enough? Would it matter? Would this moment be another footnote in a society eager to move on? Her thoughts wrestled with each other. The CEO inside her was calculating. The woman inside her was tired. The girl she once was sitting in the back of a yellow school bus, overhearing teachers doubt her potential, was watching. Sienna closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, resolved. The seatbelt sign blinked on, signaling light turbulence. But in Dr. Sienna Caldwell's mind, the air had never felt clearer. She watched the clouds break outside her window, each wisp like a threshold crossed. The tea in her hand had gone lukewarm, forgotten. And yet, something inside her still simmered, not with rage, with reckoning. In the cockpit, Captain Elias Warren looked over his shoulder at the sealed cabin door. "You sure she's not going public yet?" he asked the crew coordinator. "Not yet, but the messages from ground control are getting heavier. Solara's full PR team is on standby." He chuckled dryly. "Funny, all this for a seat she paid for? She didn't start the fire, but she's about to finish it." At 38,000 feet, Wi-Fi still pulsed strong, and the internet had begun to bite. Hashtags multiplied like sparks. Black seat rights. So and to be. She stayed seated. Aurelius exposed news outlets had already picked up the thread from Trina Holloway's tweet. The photo Sienna Caldwell seated in first class. Her hands folded, eyes forward, had become iconic within the hour. A modern Rosa. Not walking off the bus, but refusing to be walked off her plane. In row 3C, Becca, the junior flight attendant, tried to finish an in-flight snack order, but her voice shook. "Would you like the, pasta or the short rib?" The passenger looked up, confused by her tremble. Becca's headset crackled with updates from corporate, policy reviews, crew protocol rewrites, names flagged. One of them was hers. Earlier, Gwen had brushed it off. We followed the override, but deep down, Becca knew. They hadn't followed justice. They'd followed habit, and habit had a price now. In the seat behind Sienna, a teenager tapped away on her phone. Her mother, seated beside her, whispered, "What are you writing?" The girl paused, smiled, a caption. She showed her mother the screen. She didn't yell. She didn't film. She didn't ask for power. She already had it. And today, she made the world remember. Back at Solara Capital, Veronica Sloan stood before a conference room full of executives who looked like they'd just come out of a boardroom ambush. "Let's be clear," she began. "This isn't about policy, or seating charts, or protocol codes." She placed both hands on the table. "This is about the face of our company, the face of our leadership, and whether we back the people we say we do." A silence fell. Then one voice. "Are we going to issue an apology?" Veronica narrowed her eyes. Not just an apology, a restructuring. Somewhere at the rear of the cabin, a middle-aged man in business casual shifted uncomfortably in his seat as he read the live article flashing across his tablet. It was from the New York Times. Dr. Sienna Caldwell, the CEO behind Solar Capital's rise to the Fortune 100, was denied her assigned first-class seat this afternoon aboard an Aurelius Air flight. The airline, ironically owned by her own firm, attempted to downgrade her without explanation. He leaned over to his seatmate. "Can you believe they did this to their own executive?" The woman beside him didn't even look up. "They didn't do it to their executive," she said, eyes steady. "They did it to a black woman. That was the point, back in first class." Trina Holloway had quietly returned to her seat, but her gaze kept drifting toward Sienna. She had spoken her truth earlier, but she still felt like a witness to history. Would this change everything? Would it be another flash-in-the-pan outrage she didn't know? But she knew this something had cracked. Not just online, in people's expectations. Gwen stood in the galley, her hands gripping the counter. Her knuckles had gone white. She stared at her reflection in the brushed steel of the overhead storage. She had been following procedure, obeying an override, not thinking, not questioning. Now, as her name climbed the internal investigation list, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not panic, shame, the subtle, gnawing shame of realizing you had been the hand of the system. Not the conscience. As turbulence gave way to calm skies again, the intercom buzzed softly. Captain Elias Warren spoke with a steady voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've received clearance to begin our descent into San Francisco. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened as we prepare for landing. We thank you for flying with Aurelius Air." Sienna looked out the window once more. The skyline was beginning to take shape in the distance. It shimmered under the golden hour. Home. But it wasn't over. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, texted Selena, "Get ready. I'm going to speak before we land." The descent had begun. Cabin lights shifted to a mellow glow. Passengers stirred, stashing devices, fastening belts. Tray tables clicked into place like the final pieces of a quiet puzzle. But one woman didn't move. Dr. Sienna Caldwell sat still, eyes on her phone, thumbs hovering. She inhaled deeply, then typed just 3 words, "Begin the call." She hit send. A moment later, the plane's internal system buzzed a discreet chime. Captain Elias Warren's voice broke the silence again, but this time it came with a slight hesitation. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're about 10 minutes from landing. One brief announcement before we begin our final descent." Pause. Please welcome a brief message from one of our passengers, authorized by Aurelius Air's executive team. Dr. Sienna Caldwell. Every head in first class turned. Necklines craned across business. Even coach quieted. And in that sudden hush, Sienna stood. Her voice, soft but unwavering, poured from the intercom like velvet thunder. Good evening. My name is Dr. Sienna Caldwell. I was assigned seat 2B on this flight, and at the gate, I was told I no longer belonged in it. No sound, no cough, no rustle, only silence, and Sienna's calm, resonant truth. I was asked to move without reason despite paying for this seat, confirming it and following every protocol. When I asked why, I was told it was policy, but no one could find the policy. They could only find precedent. She let that word hang. Because you see, the systems that deny us rarely scream. They whisper. They smirk. They assume. In the rear of the aircraft, Trina Holloway gripped the armrests. In the galley, Becca froze mid-motion, a napkin in her hand. In the cockpit, Captain Warren listened like a man receiving instructions, not just from corporate, but from conscience. I didn't raise my voice. Sienna continued. I didn't escalate, because I didn't need to. My dignity does not require defense. My belonging is not a matter of convenience. I am not an exception to the rule. I am the rule rewritten. Phones were already recording, not the intercom feed, but the expressions of passengers. The tears in one woman's eyes in 14F, the slow nod of an older man in 9A, the tightened jaw of a young black father holding his daughter close in 18D. Sienna went on, I'm not here to shame anyone, but I am here to remind us that power, when left unquestioned, becomes policy, and silence, when practiced long enough, becomes complicity. I am not here to tell you who I am. I'm here to remind you who you are, and what kind of world you want to fly through. There was a beat of silence, and then thank you. We'll be landing shortly. The intercom clicked off. Sienna sat down, and the cabin, still hushed, exhaled slowly, reverently. 10 rows back, a teenager whispered. She just dropped the realest thing I've ever heard. The mother beside her wiped a tear. She didn't even raise her voice. She didn't have to. In the first-class galley, Gwen leaned against the wall. Becca stood beside her, face pale. We are not trained for moments like this, Becca whispered. No, Gwen said slowly. But maybe we should be. At Aurelius Air headquarters, Veronica Sloan stood alone in her office. The live stream of the in-flight audio had already gone viral. She reached for her phone, dialed the internal line. Prepare the public response, she said. But we're not writing this one for PR. Pause. We're writing it for history. In the cockpit, Captain Warren looked toward the runway. We're cleared, the co-pilot said. Captain Warren nodded. Let's bring her home. Back in seat 2B. Sienna finally leaned her head back. She didn't smile. She didn't sigh. She simply existed, as she had all along, with dignity, with resolve, with the kind of quiet power that needed no permission and no apology. The wheels kissed the tarmac with a hush, as if even the plane knew something sacred had happened above the clouds. Flight 317 slowed to a gentle roll along the runway at San Francisco International Airport, the quiet inside heavier than when it had lifted off. No applause, just reflection. Everyone waited. For what? No one quite knew, but something was different now. As the aircraft pulled toward the gate, Captain Elias Warren removed his headset and exhaled. You ever had a flight like this? His co-pilot asked. Warren glanced at the passenger list again, at the name Caldwell now etched into memory. "No," he murmured. "And I don't think we ever will again." The cabin lights brightened, but no one leapt up. No one rushed the overhead bins. Instead, they turned, in quiet unity, toward Seat 2B, where Dr. Sienna Caldwell remained still, unreadable, a presence, not a spectacle. Trina Holloway clutched her phone. The notifications had exploded: media requests, social shares, journalist threads weaving her photos into a movement. But she didn't open them yet. This moment wasn't for clicks. It was for witnessing. A history happening. In row 14, the teenage girl looked at her mother and whispered, "Should we say something to her?" The mother smiled. "No need. She's already said it for all of us." When the door opened, Gwen stood beside it, her posture stiff. Protocol demanded she thank passengers for flying, but protocol had failed today. So instead, when Sienna approached, Gwen looked her in the eyes. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Sienna paused, met her gaze with calm. "I hope you mean that," she replied, then nodded once, and walked on. Outside the aircraft, a small team stood by. Selena, hair pinned tightly, phone in hand, Aurelius's head of ground relations, 2 journalists, 1 camera, and 3 executives from Solara Capital, faces taut with awareness of the storm still gathering. Sienna descended the steps with the poise of a seasoned general returning from a silent battle. Not triumphant, not boastful, but unbroken. Selena approached first. "No press conference," Sienna said before her friend could speak. "Understood. But can I hug you?" Sienna nodded, and they embraced. Not for the camera, but for the cost. For the burn of humiliation turned into clarity. One of the reporters stepped forward hesitantly. "Dr. Caldwell, just one question. What do you say to those calling this a stunt?" Sienna turned slowly, her voice, again, gentle but surgical. "If you think demanding dignity is a stunt, you've lived in comfort too long." She turned away. The camera caught it all, and the internet would not let go. In a private black sedan headed to Solara's campus, Selena watched Sienna stare out the window. "You didn't want this to go public," Selena said. "No," Sienna replied, "but it needed to. You think they'll try to spin it?" "Of course," Sienna said softly. "They'll say it was miscommunication or misunderstanding, maybe an isolated mistake." She looked over, eyes clear, but we both know it wasn't a mistake. It was a mirror. Back in the terminal, Trina finally hit publish. A new caption. The flight landed, but her words are still flying. We didn't witness an incident today. We witnessed a shift. A few hours later, back at Solara HQ, the emergency boardroom filled. Veronica Sloan sat at the head, flanked by senior executives, legal counsel, 2 diversity advisors, and the company historian, because they knew this wasn't just a moment. It was legacy. "She's in the building," someone whispered. "Let her in," Veronica said. "She's earned more than a seat. She's earned the floor." The doors opened, and Sienna walked in not as a guest, but as a truth too large to ignore. No announcement, no preamble. She stood at the center, let silence do its work, then finally spoke. "I'm not here to fix what I didn't break, but I am here to expose it. This isn't about one flight. It's about every system that protects the comfort of the unaware at the cost of the unseen." A board member shifted uneasily. Another cleared her throat, but no one interrupted, because to do so now would be to betray everything. Sienna continued, You ask if we should issue a statement. You ask if we should compensate. You ask how to control the narrative. But I ask, what will you change inside? She looked at them each in turn. And who will you become after? She left the room without waiting for consensus. Because the truth doesn't wait for permission. It only waits to be spoken. And once it is, there's no putting it back in the overhead bin. The headlines came swiftly. Black CO denied seat on flight. Her response grounded more than just a plane. The voice from seat 2B, how one woman's calm exposed an industry storm dignity doesn't need volume. Sienna Caldwell speaks, world listens, and still. Dr. Sienna Caldwell refused interviews, not out of silence, but out of principle. This story isn't mine alone, she told Selena one morning in her sunlit office. It belongs to every quiet moment of injustice that never made it to a microphone. But behind the scenes, change churned. Aurelius Heir issued an apology carefully worded, heavily edited, yet still insufficient. Solera Capital followed with something bolder, a commitment to real policy overhaul, diverse leadership evaluations, and public disclosures of internal bias training outcomes. The public was watching, but more importantly, Sienna was watching. And so were the passengers from Flight 317. In a quiet cafe near Solera HQ, Gwen sat across from Sienna. No cameras, just coffee and accountability. I want to thank you, Gwen said, voice cracking. Not just for speaking, but for making me listen. Sienna nodded gently. What matters is what you do next. I already resigned, Gwen admitted. Sienna raised an eyebrow. I thought maybe I could do more from outside the system. Maybe build something better. That, Sienna said, is how things begin. Meanwhile, Trina Holloway turned her viral moment into something lasting. She founded Altitudes, a digital magazine focused on travel equity, representation in aviation, and passenger advocacy. Its first cover, Sienna Caldwell. Not glamorized, just standing at the terminal window, alone, watching planes take off. Captioned, "We don't belong in a seat. We belong in the sky." At a university town hall 6 weeks later, Sienna stood before a packed auditorium. She wasn't there as a CEO. She was there as a mirror. Justice doesn't always march in the streets. She said, sometimes it walks quietly down an airplane aisle, carrying the weight of every no one else saw. A student asked, "What would you tell your younger self?" Sienna paused, then smiled, softly. I'd tell her, "You're not too much. You're just..." Ahead, in the boardroom of Solera Capital, Veronica Sloan changed the dress code, the recruiting pipelines, and most critically, the decision rooms. Every major meeting now included an equity liaison, and Sienna's voice, permanent seat at the table, no longer as a guest, but as a compass. Selena, too, changed, not just in her job title, but in how she fought smarter, deeper, and for more than just spin. She once said to Sienna, "You made me realize I was helping shape the window dressing while the foundation was cracked." Sienna smiled. Now we rebuild. And on one quiet afternoon, Sienna returned to the same terminal, Gate 42, the scene of that quiet denial. She didn't board this time. She just sat, watched travelers hustle past, and breathed. A child pointed at her, whispering something to his mother. The mother smiled and nodded. Sienna didn't hear what was said, but she didn't need to. Some messages travel farther than any flight ever could. A flight attendant approached. "You're Dr. Caldwell." "Right." Sienna looked up. "Yes." The young woman smiled nervously. "I'm training with Aurelius now." After what happened, they changed the entire module. I know, Sienna said. They told me. The young woman hesitated, then added, Thank you. For what? For not shouting. For not backing down. For being calm when you didn't have to be. Sienna nodded. That's the hard part. Then she stood, shook the woman's hand, and said quietly, But the sky's still ours. All of it. As she stepped away, her phone vibrated. A message from Selena. You grounded the plane, but you helped others take flight. And sometimes, the most powerful protest isn't shouted. It's spoken softly from seat 2B into the heart of a broken system. Dr. Sienna Caldwell didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for everyone who's ever been told they didn't belong, who's ever been passed over, silenced, or reassigned for no good reason. Her calm wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Her silence before speaking wasn't submission, it was precision. And when she finally stood up, the ripple was so loud, it grounded an airline. This story reminds us dignity isn't something granted, it's something we carry. And injustice, when left unchallenged, becomes routine. But when we speak, when we rise, even the skies must listen. So what seat are you reclaiming? What silence are you breaking? What story will you write into history? If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's keep telling the stories that matter, the ones that challenge, that uplift, that transform. More truth is just one video away, and we're not done flying yet.